One thing that we can all agree upon is that we need more housing. That is very, very clear. But when we start building the housing and bringing it to the market, especially with these master plan communities, you also want it to be visually appealing, you want it to make sense, and you want it to be a place that Torontonians are proud of. I had a conversation with Brent Haynes. Now, he's a Toronto designer that has created a master plan community for city-owned land. And this is along Lakeshore Boulevard West, and he's calling it Parkshore. I asked him what was behind his vision, why he's spending so much time on this, what's the feedback been like, and the road uphill to actually make this happen is obviously going to be big, but I wanted to bring some attention to it. And the main reason why is I like people that think big, and this guy thinks big. So I want to share the interview that I did with him. I'd love if you could be interactive in the comments on this video and let me know what you think of this. If this is an area maybe you already live in or you've thought about living in, would this bring that area to the next level? And would we like to see the city taking land that they already use and turning it into development? Here's the interview with Brent. I hope you enjoy. All right, Brent, thank you for being with me today to talk about Parkshore. So why don't we just start there? What is Parkshore, and why should the audience of this YouTube channel want to know what it is, and why should they be rooting that it actually moves forward?
First of all, thanks, Tom, for having me on today. Parkshore, in its simplest form, it's a master plan. It's a vision for a master plan on the west side of Toronto, close to Etobicoke. It's between Ellis Avenue and Palace Royale, so that's Queen King intersection, that pedestrian bridge. It's a vision for 1.4 kilometers of a new development, a new community on what is essentially Toronto-owned land that would house plus or minus 7,500 people, create new public space, and be really an attraction for visitors as well as potential new homeowners for the future.
And I know you had actually lived in that area before you kind of had this thought and this idea. What were kind of the downfalls you saw? So you lived in that area. You actually woke up every single morning and walked down there. What were the things you think you can improve on?
Yeah, so I mean, I would be about 20-minute walk and go down to the lakeshore, going underneath the Gardiner, cross this incredible intersection of 6, 7, 8 lanes of the eastbound, westbound, and then eventually reach the waterfront. And you got an incredible boardwalk, you got beaches, you got Martin Goodman Trail being 50 or so kilometers of biking trail. It's an incredible space to be, but to get to it is really unfortunate. And the incredibly wide infrastructure of Lakeshore Boulevard is just not desirable to be around, and it's not efficient use of space either. So it was going there and seeing that there's a ton of land here that's actually not being utilized, and that land should be utilized, whether it be for public good or for producing new homes or for both.
I know you talked about bringing a certain amount of housing to this proposal as well, which is obviously why we're talking about this today. Is a percentage of it purpose-built rental versus owner-occupied that you can purchase? Has there been any definition on that?
Not quite. I think if the city were to pursue something like this, they're going to have a number that they determine is appropriate for development. And there's also going to be developers involved, and they're going to have to see what in the end is profitable or not. There is going to be a lot of conversations there. So while the idea of purpose-built or rental properties can be very nice, I didn't want to just go throw out a random number and be kind of irresponsible with that. So it's really about how can you develop a master plan, provide this amount of homes that also is really nice to be in. And how that is actually divided up can be determined at a later date if it were to be pursued. Very preliminary, very visionary is the thought right now.
So my understanding on any type of development, whether it's building your own house from scratch, just one property, or doing a master plan community, is that typically the process is you buy the land, right? Once you have the land, then you go to the city with your plans, and it's this whole long back and forth process, approvals and things like that. And then finally you get the approval, then you got to get the financing, and then you build it. And the reason I'm saying all these things is because this is different. The city already owns this land. So can you kind of break that down for me and the people watching? Like, why is this one maybe more complicated or perhaps less complicated because the city already owns this land?
You don't have a developer who owns the land that you can do those normal processes. So the land right now is the land in between the eastbound and westbound, which is a median, a few meters wide. But then also north of that land is a buffer zone of another 30, 40, 50 meters to the Gardiner. And so that land is completely unused at all. And then in addition to that, there's public parking that's just south of the boulevard, which isn't used for public good either. If you were to not have service parking, but actually a parking structure, it'd be much more efficient with your land. You can still add parking for public or visitors without actually taking up so much land. So all these pieces of land, I don't think the city realizes how valuable it is. And by simply consolidating the boulevard, Lakeshore Boulevard, not to have a median in between it, not to have the buffer zone on the north, but actually bring that to the south, then you can consolidate all that to be now an extension of the public park that exists today along the waterfront. And that's where you start adding more public space and the master plan of all the buildings. So because it's city owned, because there'd be much more process involved, it would first require a change of where the road exists, but then parceling it out and then selling the land. So there's actually an additional step, but because it's city owned, there's a lot more power or ability to choose what happens with this land. So that could involve build certain percentage of this land is publicly owned park space, or can only go to this density. And so by selling the land, the cities can choose how the developer goes about that.
Understood. And I think something that we have to talk about too is like traffic in the city of Toronto is horrendous as it is, right? Like that's putting it lightly.
Yeah.
This proposal, are roads being moved? What would that do? Like, what does this all look like? And why would people want to consider that to happen?
Yeah. So there would not be a reduction of road. To be straight up, it is talking about just reallocating the road that exists today. So we're not talking about removing lanes. We're not talking about removing the entire road system. You know, there's conversations happening, do we remove the entire Gardiner, which is very, very far away from what, you know, this master plan is trying to get at, that it's important to have the infrastructure we have in place. I don't think there'd be a reason to have a visionary master plan that removes the road. It's just kind of unrealistic at this point in time. So it's just talking about taking the placement of the road where it exists and just moving it north. And of course, just moving it more north, that's a huge undertaking by itself. But the reality is that the land is so incredibly valuable. The city would be profiting a great deal off parceling off the land, and still being able to move the road and change all the infrastructure in place. It is a huge undertaking, but still profit off that. So there's a profit aspect by also adding new homes to the city that needs some new homes.
Right.
And by adding public space. This sounds like an incredible win-win-win. It just takes a lot of work to get to that point.
So we've talked about all the potential pros of this. We talked about the one con of obviously construction is construction and it's not great, and moving a road is not a simple thing to do. Right. For you, just being, you know, non-biased about this, I know you put this together. Is there any other cons that people have come to you when you've showed them this, that they've said like, well, what about this? What about this that you've thought about and maybe adjusted?
I think people think this is unrealistic for a city to actually move on something like this. This is something that the city would maybe do a small parcel here or there, actually develop on or go through a process. It's just massive is what it comes down to. It might be too bold. It might be too scary. I think the scope of this is a little extreme. But other than that, there hasn't been a lot of minutia in terms of the details of the unrealistic aspects of this. It still takes into consideration how to access each building, how to do the loading and the unloading, the deliveries. There's still all the infrastructure needed for this community to exist. It's just been hidden underground. And it's not just ignoring the fact that you still need a community to function like a community today in Toronto. It's just kind of taking a really bold stance at it.
And I had asked you this before we started recording, but I'd actually like to go back to it. So what's this experience been like for you? Like, I wanted to chat with you today. You reached out to me. I looked through it. You obviously put a ton of time and effort into this. I think you got a blog TO article published on it. And so you're starting to get some media, and hopefully this video will do something for you as well. But you need to get this to a point that the right people are seeing it, taking it seriously, and setting up meetings. What's been so far? I think it'd be interesting for people watching this. Have you been trying to talk to the city? Are you getting anywhere? Are you getting pushback? What's it been like?
Yeah, so I was naive to think that something like going on social media, posting this, and reaching out to the mayor or previous mayor candidates or councillors would grab any attention. It was nothing. It was silent. Okay. So what happened next was, I'd actually start emailing them more privately. And the response was from any of the councillors nearby, is you got to talk to Councillor Perk, which is the ward this plan would be built on. There's a lot of hesitation coming from, we have, been looking at this site. We have this public engagement session. But when you look at the public engagement session, it's looking at very minor things such as, we need to fix the water fountain, or the intersection's too wide. Then they have points of, people like to sit here and have a picnic. And the study they've done is very, very not bold. It's not talking about new development. It's not talking about new. Sure. So this is where they've landed and said, we've done our study. We're not looking to do anything else, which has been unfortunate, because why not do something incredible for the city, for the community, for the ward that he represents? So that's been that side of it. The next side of it has been some nonprofits and previous mayor candidates reaching out to see if they have any thoughts or feelings with this. And it really came down to we don't engage or promote developments of this sort.
What does that mean? What does this sort mean?
Yeah, so I think it's two pieces. One is that it's not gone through a city proposal, going through the normal processes, which we kind of talked on that you can't. And the second is this would ruffle a lot of feathers because the amount of people that would have to be involved and be okay with this type of thing moving forward, that there's a lot of nonprofits will have their own private fundings, that this can get messy and become controversial. So there's an aspect of being too big, too controversial that you don't want to risk of being negative thing for your own nonprofit actually develop on or go through a process. So the last thing is, I'm trying to go to urban Toronto, see if there's at least some recognition that can be had there. And also throughout this entire process, I've been trying to see, what would a developer do? Is there a way a developer can get engaged? So I have reached out to developers, and it's come down to it's too early in the process. This would take a lot of social capital they need for their own business. They need that social capital to make the development have in their portfolio to actually happen. So there's not really much reward for them to use their own for a project that could be nothing.
Gotcha.
Through that, I've been pushed towards TRREB, which is an entity within the city of Toronto, which focuses on land, the portfolio of Toronto real estate, the land that they have and what they're doing with it. So they do have a list of work. So this actually might fit quite nicely in there. So I've reached out, of course, to probably like 20 different people on that team, no responses, until finally I just, messaged the board of directors. Someone on the board of directors knew planner and architect there. And he actually said, I'll bring it to the next meeting and we'll see if they looked into this, if this is something they're willing to pursue. So I think that's been maybe the best lead I've had there. So it's been really reaching out to every single thing I can think of, government organization, nonprofits, private developers, media, and seeing what can actually be put together to at least get some attention. And I think it's important to note that I'm not trying to go out and say, here's a master plan, build it. This is like the end all be all. It's a vision. It's an idea of how we can bring more homes to Toronto, create an awesome community, make the waterfront as best as it can be, and just improve the city that I live in, we all live in and love. That's all this is trying to be. So it's about pushing that, not a snobby architect, designer, just wanting to build this thing that I've created. I want to be very careful and say that's not what I'm trying to do here.
I'm going to put the links to the website that you have. I'll put the blog TO article and everything else in the description of this video so people can check it out. And as we had this conversation, I'll have had, pictures that have come up from the designs that you've sent me. Anything final you want to talk about or just say to the people watching this? Like if they're interested or they have questions, I'm sure they'll leave comments as well. Like how far are you going to take this? It seems like so far you're getting pushback. It's not going to be easy. You haven't picked an easy way to do this. That obviously this takes time and money. So what's next?
I've got a full list of probably about 100 different contacts I've been reaching out to at least, again, through any of those streams. Yeah. Visibility is the first thing. Yeah. Second is to get at least some sort of traction. If generally the public thinks this is an awful idea, then there's nothing that's going to happen. Sure. If people think this is really cool, I'd love to live here, I'd love to improve the waterfront, I'd love to see this awesome destination. There's a BMX park, there's tennis courts, there's viewpoints. You want that as part of Toronto, then I think the next step is reach out to Councillor Perks, reach out to your own councillor, just a simple email bringing attention to the space saying this is actually valuable will go a decent way. And I think that would be my goal in the next step, just gain some attention from the councillors to actually bring it to the table and consider it as a true option.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you chatting with me today about this, and I wish you a ton of luck moving forward with it, okay?
Tom, thank you so much.
Home is where your story begins.